Welcome to North Stories. It's strange how life moves in rhythms. You follow the same path every day, the same train, the same streets, the same elevator to your floor, as if you're living the same day on repeat. My name? Let's call me Adam for now. Just another face in the crowd, another worker in the tower of endless glass windows. But something changed for me, something I can't quite explain yet. Let me start from the beginning. It was Neo Haven, the city of lights, as people like to call it. For as long as I can remember, my world consisted of steel, glass, and the hum of machines. Neon signs and holographic billboards cast their glowing colors over crowded streets, and at night, the city came alive like a living organism, pulsing and breathing, yet strangely lifeless. Every corner had its story, but none of them were mine. I worked in a finance building, one of those monoliths that reach into the sky as if mocking anyone below. Each day felt like the last, sitting in front of a monitor for hours, answering emails, pushing buttons. Even my apartment, a gray box on the 38th floor, seemed designed to drain the color from my life. I sometimes wondered if anyone ever noticed when I came or went. Maybe I was as invisible as I felt. It was during one of those late nights, riding the elevator back up, that it all started. The elevator was always a silent companion, whisking me to and from work in that hollow steel capsule. But on this particular evening, it felt different. I remember staring at the polished walls, seeing my reflection, and feeling a subtle sense of disconnection, as if I were looking at a stranger. The elevator was unusually slow, or maybe it was just my imagination. But I wasn't imagining what happened next. It was subtle at first, a low hum that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Then the lights flickered, once, twice, and then the whole elevator shook, but not violently. It was more like a shiver, as though the entire structure was adjusting itself. I glanced at the floor indicator, watching as the numbers began to change faster than they should have. 35. 37. 40. 60? It didn't make sense. I had never been to the 60th floor. There was no 60th floor. Before I could react, the elevator doors opened with a soft chime. But what lay beyond wasn't my apartment hallway. It was something else entirely. There was light, but it wasn't the sterile, harsh light of an office or apartment building. It was soft, almost alive, bathing the world in a gentle glow. I stepped out hesitantly, my shoes making no sound on the ground, which seemed to shimmer beneath my feet. The air was fragrant, filled with the scent of something I couldn't quite place. Flowers, perhaps, but more exotic than anything I'd ever known. It was as though I had crossed into a dream, but I was awake. I could feel it in my skin, in my bones. I wasn't supposed to be here. Then came the figure. At first, it was just a silhouette in the distance, barely distinguishable from the glow surrounding it. But as it moved closer, I could make out more, a tall, robed figure with features that seemed to shift, never quite settling on any one face. He stopped a few feet in front of me, eyes locked on mine, though I couldn't tell what color they were, only that they held an unfathomable depth. "Adam," the figure said, and I felt a strange tug in my chest. "You've been called here for a reason. What is this place?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "This is not the world you know," the figure replied, his tone calm but filled with a weight that made the words sink deep into my mind. "It is a world between worlds, a reflection of the choices you have yet to make." That didn't make any sense. Choices? What choices? Every life follows a path, but not all paths are visible. You've been living in the shadow of your own potential, Adam, unaware of the connections that bind you to something greater. I opened my mouth to protest, to tell him he had the wrong person. I wasn't special. I wasn't important. But before I could speak, the world around me shifted. One moment I was standing in that glowing space, and the next, I was somewhere else entirely. I found myself in what looked like a marketplace, though unlike any I had ever seen. Stalls lined the streets, filled with goods that shimmered and shifted in color as I looked at them, crystals, strange fruits, objects I couldn't identify. The people, if they were people, moved with a fluid grace, their faces kind but distant, like they knew more than they would ever say. And then I realized something strange. I could hear thoughts, whispers all around me, but they weren't coming from the people. It was the place itself. The air buzzed with energy, like the world was alive and speaking to me. The guardian, that's what I'd started calling the figure in my mind, was beside me again. "You are at the beginning of your journey," he said. "But understand this, nothing here is as it seems. You will be tested, and through those tests, you will come to understand the truth of who you are." I wanted to ask him what that meant, but before I could, the scene changed again. This time, I was on a mountain path, the wind cold against my skin. The trail before me was steep, and I could see clouds swirling below as though I were already above the heavens. Ahead, a group of figures climbed the path. They were familiar, not in their faces, but in the way they moved, the way they carried themselves. I knew them, though I had never met them. "Your first trial awaits." The guardian's voice echoed in my mind, though he was nowhere to be seen. "You must walk this path and face what lies ahead." I hesitated for a moment, staring down the mountain, where the swirling clouds seemed to beckon me back to safety. But something inside me, the part that had grown tired of the monotony, of the endless cycle of meaningless tasks, urged me forward. So I walked. The climb was harder than I expected. The air grew thinner as I ascended, each step requiring more effort than the last. But it wasn't just the physical strain that weighed on me. There was something else, a heaviness in my heart, as though with each step, I was carrying the weight of every decision I had ever made. Regret, doubt, fear, they all clung to me like invisible chains, dragging me down, trying to pull me back. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Somewhere along the path, I began to notice the others, the figures ahead of me. They were struggling too, each one burdened by something only they could see. One by one, they began to falter, stopping in their tracks, unable or unwilling to go any further. I wanted to help them, to reach out and offer a hand, but every time I tried, something held me back. Was it fear? Or something else? I wasn't sure. All I knew was that I had to keep going, no matter how difficult the path became. Finally, after what felt like hours, I reached the top. The summit was nothing like I had imagined. Instead of a glorious view or a moment of triumph, I found myself standing before a single door, plain, unadorned, yet radiating a quiet power. I knew, without being told, that whatever lay beyond that door was the true beginning of my journey. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly as I touched the handle. The door swung open silently, revealing a blinding light. For a moment, I hesitated, unsure of what awaited me on the other side. But then, with a deep breath, I stepped through. And that's when everything changed. Stepping through the door was like falling into another reality. I didn't feel my feet touch the ground, didn't sense any movement at all. It was as if I had simply blinked and found myself somewhere else. When my eyes adjusted to the light, I saw I was no longer on the mountain path. Instead, I stood in a vast, open field that stretched endlessly in every direction. The sky above was an impossible shade of violet, streaked with swirls of gold, and the ground beneath my feet was soft, covered in grass that shimmered like it had been dusted with stars. But I wasn't alone. In the distance, I could make out a group of people, though calling them people didn't seem entirely right. They were more like echoes of people, their forms shifting and flickering like images caught between moments. They moved in a slow, deliberate dance, their motions fluid, almost hypnotic. It felt like they were part of the field itself, their bodies blending into the strange beauty of the landscape. As I stood there, unsure of what to do, the guardian appeared beside me again, though this time, I hadn't noticed him arrive. He was simply there, as if he had always been standing at my side. "You've entered the realm of echoes," he said, his voice soft but resonant, filling the air around us. "This is where memories dwell, both forgotten and remembered, where choices ripple across time." "Memories?" I asked, my eyes still fixed on the figures in the distance. "Whose memories?" "Yours," the guardian replied, turning to face me with a look that seemed to pierce straight through me. "And theirs." Every soul carries with it the weight of its past, but here, the echoes of those choices are given form. You must face what lies ahead, Adam. The past is not as distant as you think. I wanted to protest, to tell him that I didn't understand, but before I could find the words, one of the figures in the distance broke away from the group and began walking toward me. As the figure drew closer, it started to take shape, its features sharpening into something more recognizable. I gasped as I realized who it was. My father. He looked just as I remembered him, strong, serious, with the same furrowed brow and the eyes that always seemed to judge me. But there was something different about him now. His face wasn't just familiar. It was weighed down by a sadness I hadn't seen before, as though he were carrying something much heavier than his usual disapproval. Adam, he said, his voice softer than I remembered, but still carrying that edge of sternness that had always made me nervous as a child. I took a step back, confused. How are you here? He didn't answer right away, just kept looking at me with that same sad intensity. Then, finally, he spoke. This is where we must face what we never said. Where you must confront the past that you've tried to bury. There are things left unfinished, Adam. You can't move forward until you've dealt with them. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Memories that I had long pushed to the back of my mind came rushing forward. Fights, misunderstandings, the way he'd always looked at me with that quiet disappointment. Like I wasn't enough, like I hadn't lived up to whatever expectations he had. We hadn't spoken in years, and now, even in this strange place, I felt the same mixture of anger and hurt boiling up inside me. I don't want to do this, I muttered, turning away from him, from the figure that wasn't really my father but felt too real to ignore. I didn't ask for this. You didn't have to, the guardian said, his voice calm but insistent. The past always finds its way to the present. You cannot run from it. I shook my head, trying to clear the rising storm of emotions. What do you want from me? It's not about what we want, my father's echo said, stepping closer. It's about what you need to face. We were always at odds, Adam. I know that. But this isn't about blame. It's about understanding. Understanding? I snapped, finally turning to face him, my frustration bubbling over. You never understood me. You never tried to. You just expected me to be something I wasn't. He didn't flinch at my anger, didn't raise his voice to meet mine. Instead, he sighed, his shoulders sagging as though the weight of the years between us had finally caught up to him. I was hard on you. Too hard, maybe. But you don't understand either. You only saw what I expected from you. You never saw what I wanted for you. I stared at him, my breath coming in shallow bursts. What you wanted for me? I wanted you to be better than me, he said, his voice thick with emotion now. I wanted you to have more than I ever did. But I went about it the wrong way. I see that now. His words struck a chord deep inside me, and for the first time, I felt something shift, a crack in the wall of resentment that I had built between us. I opened my mouth to say something, but no words came out. I was too overwhelmed, too tangled in a mess of emotions I hadn't let myself feel in years. The silence stretched between us, heavy and full of things left unsaid. Finally, the guardian spoke again, his voice like a soft breeze cutting through the tension. You cannot change the past, Adam. But you can learn from it. You can let it go. I didn't know if I was ready for that, ready to let go of all the anger, the bitterness that had defined my relationship with my father for so long. But as I stood there, staring into the face of the man who had shaped so much of my life, I realized that I had been carrying this burden for far too long. It was exhausting, and I was tired. I took a deep breath, letting the air fill my lungs, and then slowly I let it out. I'm sorry, I whispered, barely able to meet his eyes. For everything. My father's face softened, and for the first time, I saw something I hadn't seen in him before, understanding. And I'm sorry too, Adam, he said. I didn't know how to show it, but I loved you. I always did. The weight on my chest lifted, just a little, and I felt a strange sense of relief, like I had let go of something I hadn't realized I was holding on to so tightly. The figure of my father began to fade, dissolving into the air like mist, but his words lingered in the space between us. "Remember what you've learned here," the guardian said, stepping forward as the echo of my father disappeared completely. "This was only the beginning. You have more to face, but you've taken the first step." I nodded, still trying to process everything that had just happened. It felt surreal, like waking from a vivid dream and trying to hold onto the fragments before they slipped away. But deep down, I knew something had changed. I had faced one of my deepest wounds, and though it wasn't fully healed, the process had begun. The guardian gestured toward the horizon, where another door had appeared, standing alone in the field of shimmering grass. "Your journey continues," he said. "But remember, Adam, what you face next will be even more difficult. The trials will test not only your strength but your heart." I took one last look at the field, at the place where my father's echo had stood, then turned toward the door. With a deep breath, I walked forward, ready to face whatever lay ahead. As I reached for the handle, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I knew the next part of my journey wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I stepped through the door, and everything shifted again. The first thing I noticed was the sound, loud, constant, like a storm raging in the distance. But it wasn't wind or thunder, it was something mechanical, a deep, rhythmic hum that vibrated through the air. The ground beneath my feet felt solid, but it wasn't earth or grass. It was cold, smooth metal. I blinked, my vision adjusting to the dim light. I found myself in what looked like the heart of a vast, industrial complex. Towering machines loomed over me, their gears and pistons moving with a slow, steady grind. Steam hissed from vents high above, and the walls stretched so far into the distance that I couldn't see where they ended. The ceiling, if there was one, was lost in shadow. For a moment, I stood frozen, trying to make sense of my surroundings. This place was nothing like the peaceful field I had just left behind. It felt hostile, oppressive, as though the machines themselves were watching me, waiting for something. The hum of machinery seemed to grow louder, echoing through the massive chamber, and I realized I wasn't alone. In the distance, barely visible through the haze of steam and shadow, I saw figures moving. Unlike the ghostly echoes I had seen in the realm of echoes, these figures were more solid, more real. They moved with purpose, darting between the machines like they belonged here. I stepped forward cautiously, my footsteps ringing out on the metal floor. As I moved closer to the figures, I could make out more details. They were dressed in tattered, grease-stained clothing, their faces obscured by masks that covered their mouths and noses. Some carried tools, wrenches, hammers, while others were busy working on the machines, their hands moving with practiced efficiency. Before I could get too close, one of them turned and saw me. For a brief moment, we stared at each other, and I felt a strange tension in the air, as if I had intruded on something I wasn't supposed to see. Then, without warning, the figure raised a hand and pointed directly at me. "Intruder!" the figure shouted, his voice muffled by the mask but still clear enough to send a shiver down my spine. The others stopped what they were doing and turned to look at me. Panic surged through me, but I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the spot as more of the figures began to converge on me, their eyes, cold, unblinking, locked on mine. Just as they were about to reach me, a voice cut through the noise. "Wait!" The figures stopped in their tracks, turning toward the source of the voice. I followed their gaze and saw a new figure stepping out from the shadows. This one was different from the others. He was taller, with a commanding presence, and unlike the others, he wore no mask. His face was sharp, angular, his eyes bright with intelligence. He moved with a confidence that suggested he was in charge. The masked figures parted as he approached me, and I could feel the weight of his gaze as he looked me up and down. For a long moment, he said nothing, simply studying me as if trying to determine whether I was a threat. Finally, he spoke. "You're not one of us," he said, his voice calm but edged with suspicion. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "No," I admitted. "I don't know where I am." The man raised an eyebrow. "This is the forge. The heart of the machine. Only those who are part of the system are allowed here. I glanced around at the machines, at the masked workers who were still watching me closely. The system? What system? The one you've been a part of all your life, whether you realized it or not, the man said. We all serve it, in one way or another. Some of us work the machines. Others control them. His words sent a chill down my spine. And what about me? Why am I here? The man studied me for a moment longer, then nodded to the others. Leave us. The masked figures hesitated for a second, but then they turned and melted back into the shadows, leaving me alone with the man. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he looked at me more intently. You've been brought here because you're different, he said quietly. Because you don't belong. Not anymore. I don't understand, I said, my voice shaking slightly. You will, the man replied. But first, you must make a choice. He gestured toward one of the machines, a massive, hulking thing with countless gears and levers. This is where it all begins, he said. The system controls everything, every action, every thought, every decision. But the truth is, the system is broken. It has been for a long time. And those of us who work here, we're part of that broken system. We keep it running, but it's falling apart. I looked at the machine, its gears grinding and clanking in a rhythmic, relentless motion. Why don't you just stop it? The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Because stopping it means losing everything. The system may be broken, but it's all we have. Without it, there's chaos. Destruction. We've tried to stop it before, but it always comes back. He turned to face me fully, his eyes locking onto mine. That's where you come in. You've been given a chance to choose, to either continue serving the system, or to break free from it. I felt a surge of confusion and fear. What does that mean? How do I choose? The choice is simple, the man said. You can join us, become part of the system, and continue to live within its confines. Or you can walk away, leave this place behind, leave everything behind, and try to find something new. But I warn you, if you choose to walk away, you may never find your way back. I stared at him, my mind racing. The machines, the workers, the system, it all felt so far removed from the life I had known. But at the same time, there was something unsettlingly familiar about it. Like I had been living in the shadow of this place my entire life, without even realizing it. What happens if I stay? I asked, my voice barely audible. You'll continue to serve, the man said simply. You'll become part of the machine, just like the rest of us. You'll have purpose, structure, but you'll never be free. And if I leave? The man's expression darkened. If you leave, you'll have to face the unknown. The world outside the system is dangerous, unpredictable. You'll be on your own, with no guarantees. But you'll be free. I felt a knot form in my stomach. The idea of staying here, of becoming just another cog in the machine, terrified me. But the thought of leaving, of stepping into the unknown with no idea what awaited me, was just as frightening. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, weighing my options, trying to make sense of it all. The man waited patiently, his eyes never leaving mine, as if he already knew what I would choose. Finally, I spoke. I don't want to be part of the system. The man's expression softened, just slightly. Are you sure? Once you leave, there's no going back. I nodded, though my heart was pounding in my chest. I'm sure. The man studied me for a moment longer, then turned and gestured toward a door that had appeared at the far end of the chamber. Then go. That door will take you to the next step in your journey. But be warned, what lies beyond is not for the faint of heart. I hesitated, glancing one last time at the towering machines, at the workers who had returned to their tasks. Then, without another word, I walked toward the door. With every step, the sound of the machines grew fainter, until all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing. I reached the door and placed my hand on the cold metal handle. For a moment, I hesitated, feeling the weight of the decision I had just made. Then, with a deep breath, I pulled the door open and stepped through. The world beyond was nothing like I had imagined. As I stepped through the door, the world changed once again, but this time, the shift was far more disorienting. I felt as if I were falling, tumbling through a vast, open space where time didn't exist. My stomach churned as my surroundings spun around me, flashes of light and shadow streaking past so quickly I couldn't make sense of them. And then, just as abruptly as it began, the sensation stopped. I found myself standing on solid ground, but it was like no ground I had ever seen. It was smooth and reflective, like glass, stretching out endlessly in every direction, disappearing into the horizon. Above me, the sky was a dark, velvety expanse, dotted with countless stars, more than I had ever seen before. They glittered like diamonds, their light reflected in the glassy surface beneath my feet, giving the eerie impression that I was floating in space. For a moment, I stood there, feeling completely untethered, as if I were caught between worlds. Everything was silent, no hum of machinery, no distant echoes of voices. Just me, alone in this strange, mirrored landscape. I took a tentative step forward, half expecting the ground to crack beneath me, but it held firm. My footsteps echoed in the vast emptiness, the only sound in the stillness. I didn't know where I was or what I was supposed to do next. There was no sign of the guardian, no cryptic guide waiting to explain this new place. Just endless, reflective nothingness. As I walked, the only thing that seemed to change was the sky. The stars above shifted subtly, moving across the dark canvas in patterns I couldn't recognize. After what felt like hours, I stopped and looked down at my reflection in the mirrored ground beneath me. That's when I saw it. My reflection wasn't standing still like I was. It was moving. Slowly at first, but then with increasing speed, it started to walk toward me, its steps quick and purposeful. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched, frozen in place. As the reflection grew closer and closer, its eyes locked onto mine. I took a step back, but the reflection kept coming. And then, without warning, it reached out and grabbed my wrist. I gasped, stumbling backward as I felt its cold, unyielding grip. But it didn't stop. It pulled me toward the glassy surface beneath my feet, and before I could react, I was falling again, falling through the glass, into a dark void. I woke up with a start, gasping for breath as if I had been underwater. I was lying on my back, staring up at a ceiling that looked familiar. My heart was still racing, but the cold grip of fear was slowly fading, replaced by confusion. I sat up, looking around. I was in a room. A small, cramped room with a single bed, a desk, and a window covered by thick curtains. It was the kind of room you'd find in a cheap, run-down apartment. And as I looked closer, a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. This was my room. My apartment. The place I had left behind when I first entered the strange world of the Guardian. But how? How was I back here? I got to my feet, my legs shaky, and moved toward the window. I pulled the curtains aside and stared out at the city beyond. Neon lights blinked in the distance, cars honked below, and people moved through the streets, oblivious to my confusion. It was the same city I had always known, crowded, noisy, alive with a kind of restless energy. Everything was normal. Too normal. I turned away from the window, trying to make sense of what was happening. Had it all been a dream? The mountain, the realm of echoes, the forge, it had all felt so real, but now, standing here in my dingy apartment, it seemed impossible. Had I imagined the whole thing? I walked over to the desk, hoping to find some kind of clue, but everything was just as I had left it. A stack of old papers, a half-empty mug of coffee, and a small, framed photo of my mother. I stared at the photo for a moment, the familiar pang of loss stirring in my chest. She had died years ago, but I still kept the photo here, a reminder of the life I had once known. As I reached out to pick it up, something strange happened. The photo flickered. Just for a split second, like a glitch in a computer screen, the image of my mother's face distorted, replaced by something else, something darker. I blinked, my heart skipping a beat, but when I looked again, it was just a photo. Just my mother's face, smiling back at me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Very wrong. I backed away from the desk, my breath coming faster. The room, which had seemed so familiar just moments ago, now felt alien. Claustrophobic. I had to get out. I rushed to the door and threw it open, half expecting to see the hallway of my apartment building. But what I saw instead stopped me in my tracks. It wasn't a hallway. It wasn't my apartment building at all. Beyond the door was a vast, endless space, much like the mirrored landscape I had walked through earlier. But this time, the reflections were gone. Instead, the space was filled with shadows, moving, shifting shapes that slithered across the ground like living darkness. And in the center of it all, standing silently, was a figure. The Guardian. He stood there, his expression unreadable, as if he had been waiting for me all along. The shadows seemed to gather around him, but they never touched him, as if they were afraid to get too close. "You've returned," the Guardian said, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. I stepped back, my mind spinning. What is this? Why am I back here? This is not your world, Adam. The Guardian replied, his eyes never leaving mine. It never was. The world you think you know, the life you believe you've lived, it's all part of the system. A system designed to keep you in place, to make you believe you have no choice. I shook my head, my thoughts racing. But I was just in my apartment. It was real. Everything felt real. Real? The Guardian's lips curled into a sad smile. Reality is not what you think it is. The system controls what you see, what you feel, even what you remember. It keeps you trapped in a cycle, Adam. A cycle of fear, doubt, and resignation. The weight of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. Then, everything I've experienced, it was all part of this. Yes, the Guardian said. Everything you've seen, everything you've felt, has been a test. A test to see if you could break free from the system's hold. And you've come further than most. I looked around at the shadowy expanse, at the strange, shifting shapes that moved in the distance. But why? Why test me? What's the point of all this? The Guardian's expression grew more serious. Because you are different, Adam. You have the potential to see the truth, to break free from the system entirely. But that potential comes with a price. You must face the final challenge. I swallowed hard, fear and uncertainty rising in my chest. What challenge? The Guardian stepped closer, and the shadows seemed to swirl around him like a storm. The challenge of choice. You must decide, once and for all, whether to remain in the safety of the system, to live the life you've always known, or to leave it behind forever and step into the unknown. The words echoed in my mind, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I had already made one choice in the forge, to reject the system and seek freedom. But now, standing here on the precipice of something even greater, I wasn't sure if I was ready. What if I choose wrong? I asked, my voice trembling. There is no wrong choice, the Guardian said softly. Only the one you are willing to live with. But know this, once you choose, there is no going back. I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. The shadows seemed to pulse with the same rhythm, as if they were alive, waiting for my decision. Everything I had experienced, the trials, the echoes of my past, the strange, mirrored landscape, had led to this moment. And now, it was up to me to decide. With a deep breath, I took a step forward, ready to face whatever came next. I took a deep breath, the weight of the Guardian's words pressing heavily on my chest. My mind raced with uncertainty as I stood on the edge of this dark, shifting expanse, wondering if I was truly ready to face the unknown. The choice before me felt insurmountable: stay within the familiar confines of the system or step into something entirely foreign, something I couldn't predict or control. But I couldn't ignore the sense of purpose that had been growing inside me since the journey began. I had seen glimpses of a world beyond the system's control, a world that was chaotic, yes, but also full of possibility. If I turned back now, if I chose the safety of the system, I would always wonder what could have been. The Guardian watched me in silence, his face expressionless, though his eyes glimmered with something unreadable. The swirling shadows around us seemed to sense my hesitation, pulsing and shifting as if they were alive, waiting for my decision. Finally I spoke, my voice trembling but resolute. "I'm ready." The guardian didn't respond right away. He simply nodded, his gaze never leaving mine. For a moment, the shadows stilled, as though the very air around us had paused to listen. "Then you must follow," the guardian said quietly, turning and walking deeper into the dark expanse. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest, but I forced myself to take a step forward, then another. I followed him into the heart of the shadows, where the air grew colder, and the light of the distant stars seemed to dim. As we walked, the ground beneath us shifted. It no longer felt like the smooth glass from before. Now, it was rough, uneven, almost like stone. The further we went, the more the landscape changed. Strange shapes loomed in the darkness, jagged rocks, twisted trees, and things I couldn't quite make out, their forms flickering in and out of focus. After what felt like an eternity, we came to a stop in front of a massive stone archway. It was ancient, covered in strange, glowing symbols that pulsed faintly with a soft, golden light. The archway was carved out of the same rough stone that seemed to make up the ground, but it radiated a power I could feel deep in my bones. "This is the threshold," the guardian said, his voice low. "It marks the boundary between the system and the true unknown. Once you cross it, there is no turning back." I stared at the archway, my stomach twisting in knots. There was a part of me that wanted to run, to retreat to the safety of the life I had known, but I knew that if I did, I would never be free. I would never discover the truth that lay beyond the confines of the system. "Will I be alone?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. The guardian turned to me, his expression unreadable. "You will face trials, and you will encounter others, some who will help you, some who will try to stop you. But ultimately, the path is yours to walk." I nodded, my throat tight. I had come this far. I couldn't back down now. With one last deep breath, I stepped forward and crossed the threshold. As soon as I passed through the archway, the world around me exploded with light and sound. It was overwhelming, colors I had never seen, sounds that seemed to echo from deep within the earth itself. The ground shifted beneath my feet, and I stumbled, struggling to keep my balance. I was no longer in the dark expanse. Instead, I found myself standing in a forest, but it was unlike any forest I had ever seen. The trees were massive, their trunks twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching high into a sky that seemed to ripple like water. Strange plants and flowers bloomed everywhere, their petals glowing with a faint, ethereal light. The air was thick with the scent of earth and moss, mixed with something sweet and almost intoxicating. For a moment, I stood there, completely overwhelmed by the sheer sensory overload of this new world. Everything felt sharper, more vivid. The colors were too bright, the sounds too loud. It was as if my mind was struggling to process everything at once. But there was something else. A feeling deep in my chest, like a pull. It was subtle at first, but as I stood there, it grew stronger, drawing me forward, deeper into the forest. I couldn't explain it, but I knew I had to follow it. I started walking, my feet moving almost on their own. The forest seemed alive with motion, branches swayed in a wind I couldn't feel, leaves rustled as unseen creatures darted through the undergrowth. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of strange, glowing eyes watching me from the shadows, but when I turned to look, they vanished. The further I walked, the more the sense of urgency grew. It was as if something was calling to me, urging me forward, deeper into the unknown. Suddenly, the trees opened up, and I found myself standing at the edge of a cliff. Below me stretched a vast valley, its floor covered in a thick mist that glowed faintly in the fading light. In the distance, I could see mountains rising up, their peaks disappearing into the clouds. But what caught my attention was the structure in the center of the valley. It was a tower, tall, impossibly thin, and made of the same glowing stone as the threshold. It rose up out of the mist like a needle, piercing the sky. At its base, I could just make out a faint glow, like a beacon calling me toward it. "The Tower of the Nexus," a voice said from behind me. I spun around to see the guardian standing at the edge of the forest, his figure half hidden in the shadows. "What is it?" I asked, my eyes still fixed on the distant tower. The nexus is the heart of everything, the guardian explained, his voice low. It connects all realities, all possibilities. It is where the system and the unknown meet, where the lines between them blur. I turned back to the tower, a mixture of awe and fear rising in my chest. And I have to go there, don't I? The guardian nodded. The nexus holds the answers you seek, but it also holds great danger. Many have tried to reach it, but few have succeeded. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. What happens if I reach it? The guardian didn't answer right away. He seemed to consider his words carefully before he spoke. If you reach the nexus, you will have a choice to make. A final choice that will shape the future, not just for you, but for everyone. A shiver ran down my spine. The weight of his words hung heavily in the air, filling me with a sense of both dread and anticipation. What kind of choice? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. The guardian stepped closer, his eyes dark and serious. A choice between creation and destruction. Between preserving the system as it is, flawed though it may be, or dismantling it entirely and embracing the chaos of the unknown. I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. The enormity of what he was saying felt too much to comprehend. How could I possibly make such a choice? How could I decide the fate of something so vast, something that had shaped every aspect of my existence? But I don't understand, I stammered. How can I make a choice like that? The guardian placed a hand on my shoulder, his expression softening. You've come further than most, Adam. You've seen beyond the veil of the system, and now you stand on the edge of something greater. You have the power to shape what comes next. I felt a lump form in my throat. What if I make the wrong choice? There is no wrong choice, the guardian said, echoing his earlier words. Only the choice you are willing to live with. I turned back to the valley, my eyes once again drawn to the glowing tower in the distance. It felt like my entire journey had been leading to this moment, to this final, impossible decision. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew I couldn't turn back. Not now. With a deep breath, I nodded. I'll go to the nexus. The guardian gave me a long, thoughtful look before he finally nodded in return. Then your journey continues. But be warned, the path to the nexus is fraught with challenges, both external and internal. You will be tested in ways you cannot yet imagine. I steeled myself, my resolve hardening. I'm ready. Without another word, the guardian stepped back into the shadows, disappearing into the forest. I turned and looked down at the valley below, at the glowing tower that called to me like a beacon. And then, without hesitation, I began my descent into the unknown. As I descended into the valley, the mist swirled thick around my feet, softening the edges of the world. Each step down the jagged path felt heavier than the last, as if the ground itself were resisting me, testing my resolve to reach the nexus. The towering structure in the distance glowed faintly through the fog, both a guide and a warning. My mind churned with uncertainty, but beneath it, a fierce determination kept me moving forward. I had come too far to turn back now. The deeper I ventured, the more the atmosphere shifted. The air, once cool and crisp, grew dense and suffocating, laden with a tension that hummed beneath the surface. Shadows slithered along the edges of the path, growing bolder with each passing moment. I felt as if I were being watched, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me from all sides. I kept my gaze fixed on the nexus, its distant glow pulsing rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. It beckoned me, promising answers to questions I didn't even know I had. But it also filled me with an unsettling sense of dread, as if reaching it would reveal truths too terrible to face. After what felt like hours, the path leveled out, leading me to the edge of a sprawling, mist-filled plain. The ground beneath my feet was soft, spongy, and littered with strange, glowing plants that pulsed with an eerie light. The mist was thicker here, swirling around me in waves, and I could barely see more than a few feet ahead. But I wasn't alone. Shapes moved in the fog, flickering in and out of view like wraiths. At first, I thought they were just tricks of the light, shadows cast by the strange plants. But then I heard it, a low, guttural growl that sent a chill down my spine. It came from somewhere to my left, hidden in the thick fog. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Another growl echoed through the mist, this one closer, and then I saw them. Dark, shifting forms, just barely visible through the haze, circling me like predators stalking their prey. I felt a surge of panic rise in my throat. The instinct to run gripped me, but I knew that would be a mistake. Whatever these creatures were, they were faster than me, and running would only provoke them. I had to think. I had to stay calm. Slowly, I reached for the nearest glowing plant, hoping it might offer some protection or at least some light to drive the creatures away. As my fingers brushed against the delicate petals, the plant reacted. Its glow intensified, spreading like a ripple through the surrounding mist. For a moment, the creatures paused, their circling slowed, and I felt a flicker of hope. But that hope was short-lived. With a sudden, feral snarl, one of the creatures lunged from the fog. I barely had time to react. I stumbled back, narrowly avoiding its sharp, glistening claws as it swiped at me. Its body was sleek and muscular, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The rest of the pack followed, emerging from the mist with terrifying speed. I ran. My legs burned as I sprinted across the plain, the creatures hot on my heels. The ground beneath me shifted, soft and uneven, threatening to trip me with every step. I could hear them closing in, their snarls and growls growing louder, more frenzied. I pushed myself harder, my lungs screaming for air, but I knew I couldn't outrun them for long. Just as I thought they were going to overtake me, the ground dropped away beneath my feet. I tumbled down a steep slope, crashing through the thick fog as the world spun around me. I hit the ground hard, the impact jarring every bone in my body. Pain shot through my side, but I forced myself to get up, to keep moving. The creatures stopped at the edge of the slope, snarling and pacing back and forth. It was as if something was preventing them from following me down. I didn't know why, but I wasn't about to question it. I backed away slowly, watching them carefully until they finally slunk back into the fog, disappearing from sight. I let out a shaky breath, my whole body trembling with adrenaline. My heart was still pounding, my mind reeling from the close call. But I was alive, and for now, that was all that mattered. I turned to survey my new surroundings, trying to get my bearings. I had landed in a narrow ravine, the walls rising steeply on either side, their jagged edges cutting into the mist. The air down here was cooler, and the strange tension that had filled the plain above seemed to have lifted, though a sense of unease still lingered in the back of my mind. I began walking again, more cautiously this time, my eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. The ravine was eerily quiet, the only sound the soft crunch of my footsteps on the rocky ground. The mist hung low, clinging to the walls like a living thing, but it wasn't as dense here, allowing me to see a little further ahead. After what felt like another hour of walking, I came across something unexpected. A doorway, carved directly into the stone wall of the ravine. It was old, ancient even, with strange symbols etched into the stone around it, similar to the ones I had seen on the threshold. The doorway was partially open, a faint light spilling out from within, casting long shadows on the ground. I hesitated, a strange sense of déjà vu washing over me. Something about this place felt familiar, as if I had been here before, though I knew that was impossible. Still, I felt the same pull I had felt earlier, the same strange force urging me forward. With a deep breath, I stepped through the doorway. Inside, I found myself in a small, circular chamber, the walls covered in more of those glowing symbols. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and atop it sat a small, glowing orb, its light pulsing softly. The air in the chamber was thick with energy, and I could feel a faint hum vibrating through the floor beneath my feet. I approached the pedestal cautiously, my eyes fixed on the orb. It was beautiful, in a way, its light casting soft, shifting colors across the room. But there was something else about it, something that made my skin prickle with unease. It felt alive somehow, as if it were watching me. Without thinking, I reached out and touched the orb. The moment my fingers made contact, the world around me vanished. I was plunged into darkness, the air heavy and suffocating. But then, a voice echoed through the void, soft and familiar. You are close, Adam. It was the Guardian's voice. You have come farther than most, but your journey is not yet over. The Nexus awaits, but before you can reach it, you must face the truth. The darkness shifted, and I found myself standing in a new place. A room, simple and unadorned, with a single window that looked out over the city I had once known. Neo Haven. I was back in my apartment, back in the life I had left behind. But this time, something was different. I wasn't alone. Sitting at the small table by the window was a woman, her face hidden in shadow. But as I took a step closer, I recognized her. My mother. She was younger than I remembered, her face unlined by the years of struggle and loss that had eventually claimed her. She looked up at me with a soft smile, the same smile I had seen in the photograph that now seemed like a distant memory. "Mom?" My voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. She stood and walked toward me, her eyes filled with warmth and love. "Adam," she said softly, her voice like a balm to my soul. "I've missed you." I felt tears well up in my eyes, and for a moment, I forgot everything: the Nexus, the Guardian, the system. All that mattered was this moment, this impossible reunion. I reached out to touch her, to make sure she was real, but just as my fingers brushed against her arm, she vanished. The room dissolved around me, and I was once again standing in the dark, alone. The Guardian's voice returned, quiet but firm. "You must let go, Adam. The system uses your memories, your desires, to keep you tethered. If you wish to reach the Nexus, you must confront the truth. Only then will you be free." The truth. The words echoed in my mind, filling me with a deep, gnawing dread. What truth? Before I could even begin to process the question, the darkness shifted again, and I was no longer standing in the void. I was in my apartment once more, but this time, it wasn't the past. It was the present, the life I had left behind. And standing in the center of the room was me, or at least a version of me. He stared at me with hollow eyes, his face twisted in anger and despair. He was thinner, more ragged than I remembered, his clothes torn and dirty. But there was no mistaking the fact that he was me. "You're nothing," he spat, his voice venomous. "You think you're special? You're not. You're just a coward running from your life because you couldn't handle the truth." I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. "What truth?" He sneered, his eyes blazing with fury. "The truth that none of this matters. The truth that you've been living a lie. The system?" The version of me standing across the room grew darker, more menacing, as if my worst fears had taken physical form. His sneer deepened, eyes filled with bitterness. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in, suffocating me with the weight of his words. "The truth," he continued, his voice a venomous hiss, "is that you've been hiding from reality. The system you despise? It's all in your head. You created it to shield yourself from your own failures." I shook my head, my pulse racing. "That's not true. I didn't create the system. I've seen it, I've fought against it." The other me laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed around the small apartment. "Have you? Or have you just been running? Running from your responsibilities, your past, from everything that makes you who you are?" The accusation hit harder than I wanted to admit. My mind flashed back to the moments I'd tried to bury, the decisions I'd made to keep myself numb, the distractions I'd clung to, the life I had abandoned because it felt too small, too suffocating. The other me was pressing on the tender parts of my soul, the parts one thought I had left behind when I started this journey. "I'm trying to fix it," I yelled back, my voice breaking. "I'm trying to find a way out, to change things." "Change what?" He spat the words like they were poison. "You don't even know what you're fighting for, do you? You want to tear down the system? Fine, but then what? What are you left with? Just a broken life you've been too scared to face." I couldn't speak. The weight of his words pressed down on me, the truth in them wrapping around my throat, choking me. He was right, at least partly. The journey I'd been on had felt like an escape, a chance to outrun the failures that had dogged me for so long. But standing here, face to face with myself, I realized that I hadn't really been running toward freedom. I'd been running away, from guilt, from loss, from the overwhelming feeling of being trapped in my own choices. I clenched my fists, trying to steady myself. Maybe I don't have all the answers yet, but that doesn't mean I'm going to give up. The other me stepped closer, his face inches from mine now, his eyes glinting with fury. You think you can fix everything by reaching the nexus? That somehow it will magically make everything better? Wake up, Adam. The nexus doesn't care about you. It's just a myth, a distraction. Something to chase so you don't have to deal with the mess you've made of your life. I felt my legs weaken, the energy draining out of me. His words were like knives, each one cutting deeper, feeding into the doubts I had tried so hard to suppress. What if he was right? What if this entire journey was just another form of escape? A way to avoid facing the truth? But then I remembered something, the pull I had felt since crossing the threshold. That strange, unexplainable force that had guided me, even when everything felt uncertain. It wasn't just in my head. It couldn't be. I squared my shoulders, forcing myself to meet his gaze. Maybe I don't know what's waiting for me at the nexus, but I'm going to find out. And if that means facing my own failures, my own fears, then so be it. For a moment, the other me just stood there, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a twisted smile spread across his face. You still don't get it, do you? Before I could react, he lunged at me, his hands grabbing my throat with a grip of iron. I stumbled back, gasping for breath as his fingers tightened, cutting off my air. His face contorted with rage, his eyes burning with hatred. You can't escape yourself, he snarled, his voice a harsh whisper in my ear. You think you can just walk away from the past? From everything you've done? It's always going to be with you, dragging you down, no matter how far you run. I struggled, trying to break free, but his grip was too strong. My vision blurred, the room spinning around me as my lungs screamed for air. The darkness closed in, pressing on the edges of my mind, and for a moment, I thought I might lose consciousness. But then, something inside me snapped. With a surge of strength I didn't know I had, I shoved him back with all the force I could muster. He stumbled, his grip loosening just enough for me to break free. I gasped, sucking in deep breaths of air as I backed away, putting distance between us. The other me straightened, his eyes wild with fury, but I could see something else there too, fear. He was losing control, and he knew it. I wiped the sweat from my brow, my heart pounding. You're right about one thing, I said, my voice hoarse but steady. I can't escape my past. But I can choose what to do with it. I can let it define me, or I can face it, learn from it, and move forward. He glared at me, his fists clenched, but he didn't move. I'm not running anymore. I continued, feeling my confidence grow. Not from you, not from the system, not from anything. I've been afraid, yes. But fear isn't the end. It's just a challenge to overcome. The other me opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, the room began to dissolve. The walls crumbled away, the floor beneath our feet shifting and breaking apart. The apartment, the world we were in, was falling apart like a mirage. And then, in the blink of an eye, he was gone. I stood there, alone in the void once again, my body trembling from the confrontation. I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, exhaustion, and something else. Something that felt like clarity. The Guardian's voice returned, soft and distant. You have faced yourself, Adam. And in doing so, you have taken the first step toward understanding. I looked around, still disoriented from the sudden shift. Understanding what? That the system's control over you is not absolute. It thrives on your fears, your doubts, but it cannot break the spirit that seeks truth. You are not bound by the limits it imposes. You are free to choose. The air shimmered around me, and slowly, the void gave way to something new. I found myself standing at the base of a massive staircase, spiraling upward into the sky. At the top, barely visible through the haze, was the nexus. Its glow was faint, but it was unmistakable, a beacon in the distance, calling me forward. You must continue your journey, the Guardian said, his voice fainter now, as if fading from my reach. The final trial awaits. I stared up at the towering staircase, feeling a strange sense of both fear and anticipation. The Nexus was closer than ever, but so were the unknown dangers that lurked ahead. I knew this next part of the journey would not be easy, but after everything I had faced, my own fears, my own self, I was ready to move forward. With a deep breath, I placed my foot on the first step and began to climb. The stairs seemed endless, spiraling up and up into the clouds, each step a reminder of how far I had come. The weight of the journey pressed down on me, but with each step, I felt something lift inside me, an old burden, a fear, a doubt, slowly fading away. As I climbed, the world below grew smaller, fading into the mist. The silence was heavy, almost oppressive, but it was a silence filled with promise. The promise of answers, of the truth I had been seeking. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I reached the top. There, at the summit of the staircase, stood the Nexus. It was more beautiful, more awe-inspiring than I had imagined. Tall and impossibly thin, it pulsed with a soft, golden light that seemed to radiate warmth and understanding. The symbols carved into its surface glowed faintly, shifting and changing as I watched. But something else was waiting for me, too. A figure stood at the base of the Nexus, silhouetted against its light. And as I stepped closer, my heart skipped a beat. It was someone I had not expected to see. The figure standing before the Nexus was shrouded in shadow, but as I stepped closer, the details of their form came into focus. My breath caught in my throat as recognition hit me with a force I hadn't anticipated. It was Eve. She stood there, her face illuminated by the soft, golden light of the Nexus, her expression calm but unreadable. Her eyes, the same ones that had been filled with warmth and trust when we had journeyed together, now seemed distant, almost guarded. The sight of her after all this time stirred something deep inside me, relief, confusion, even anger. I had thought she was gone, taken by the system, consumed by the same forces I had been battling since the beginning of this journey. But here she was, standing in front of me, unscathed, as if nothing had changed. Eve. My voice was barely a whisper, the name catching in my throat. She didn't respond right away, simply watching me with those piercing eyes. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke, her voice soft but laced with something I couldn't quite place. "You made it, Adam." Her words, simple as they were, cut through the haze of confusion in my mind. I stepped closer, trying to read the emotion behind her gaze. You're alive. I thought I lost you." For a moment, her expression softened, and I saw a flicker of the old Eve, the one who had walked beside me through the trials, who had shared in the pain and uncertainty of this strange, twisted world. But then, just as quickly, that softness vanished, replaced by something colder. "I never left, Adam," she said, her voice even. "Not really." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I shook my head, my mind racing to make sense of what she was saying. "What do you mean? Where have you been? I searched for you, after the system took you." "The system didn't take me," she interrupted, her tone sharp, final. I froze, the weight of her statement settling over me like a suffocating fog. "What?" "But I saw it," the Guardian said. "The Guardian tells you what you want to hear," she said, stepping closer to me now, her gaze never leaving mine. "It showed you what you needed to believe so you could keep moving forward. But the truth, Adam? The truth is that I chose to stay. I chose to stand with the system." I recoiled, the words striking me harder than I could have imagined. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "That's not possible. You were fighting with me, you wanted to break free." "Did I?" she asked, her voice growing colder. "Or did you just assume that because it fit the story you were telling yourself?" The accusation hung in the air, sharp and unforgiving. I opened my mouth to protest, but no words came out. Doubt crept into my mind, gnawing at the edges of the narrative I had built in my head. Had I assumed too much? Had I projected my own desires onto Eve without ever stopping to consider what she truly wanted? She took another step closer, her eyes hard now, unrelenting. You think you're the hero of this story, Adam. You think you've been fighting against the system, trying to tear it down because it's wrong, because it's evil. But the truth is, you never really understood what the system was. You never even tried. I felt like I was drowning, the weight of her words pressing down on me, suffocating me. What are you saying? She glanced at the nexus behind her, its soft light casting long shadows across her face. The system isn't what you think it is. It's not some malicious force out to control us. It's a choice, Adam. A choice we all make, whether we realize it or not. I frowned, struggling to grasp the meaning of her words. A choice? How can that be? The system controls everything, our lives, our thoughts. It's the reason we're all trapped. Eve's gaze softened, but it was the kind of softness that came from pity, not understanding. No. The system exists because we allow it to. It's not an external force, Adam. It's a reflection of us, of our fears, our desires, our need for order and meaning in a chaotic world. We built it. We sustain it. Her words left me reeling, my mind racing to piece together this new, disorienting reality. The system wasn't some oppressive force that had enslaved us against our will. We had created it. My thoughts were a tangled mess, the very foundation of my understanding cracking beneath me. But if that's true, I said, struggling to find my voice, then why fight it? Why have you been standing with me all this time, trying to break free? Eve's eyes flickered with something, regret perhaps, but her voice remained steady. I never fought to break free, Adam. I was with you because I needed you to see, to understand. But you were so focused on escaping that you never stopped to question why the system exists in the first place. The realization struck me like a cold slap to the face. All this time, I had been running, fighting, tearing through obstacle after obstacle, desperate to break free. But I had never once questioned the purpose of it all, never asked why the system had such power, why it was so ingrained in everything. I had simply accepted it as the enemy, and Eve had been trying to show me something else. I looked at her, trying to suppress the rising anger, the feeling of betrayal. Why didn't you tell me? Why let me go through all of this without explaining what was really going on? Her gaze softened again, but this time it was filled with a deep sadness. Because you weren't ready to hear it. You had to go through the journey, Adam. You had to face your fears, confront your demons, or you never would have understood. I couldn't make you see the truth. You had to find it for yourself. I stared at her, my chest tight with a mixture of emotions, anger, confusion, sorrow. So what now? Am I just supposed to accept it? That the system is here because we need it? That all this fighting has been for nothing? Eve shook her head. It hasn't been for nothing. You've grown, Adam. You've seen what you needed to see, faced what you needed to face. But now you have a choice, one that only you can make. She gestured toward the nexus, its light glowing brighter now, almost beckoning me. The nexus represents everything you've been fighting for, everything you've been trying to understand. It's the heart of the system. If you want to destroy it, you can. But doing so won't free anyone. It will only create chaos. I looked at the nexus, then back at Eve, my mind whirling. And if I don't destroy it? Her eyes met mine, steady and calm. Then you'll have the chance to reshape it. To use it for something better. But that's up to you. I felt the weight of her words settle over me, heavy with the enormity of the decision I now faced. Everything I had believed, everything I had fought for, had led to this moment. I had spent so long trying to escape, to tear down the system I thought had trapped me. But now I realized the truth was far more complex, far more nuanced than I had ever imagined. The nexus pulsed with a quiet, almost serene energy, and I could feel its power tugging at me, offering both destruction and creation. My hand trembled as I reached out toward it, my mind a storm of conflicting thoughts and emotions. Could I truly destroy it? Could I tear down everything, even knowing that it might lead to chaos, to a world without order, without structure? Or could I trust myself to reshape it, to build something new, something better, even if that meant embracing the very thing I had spent so long trying to escape? The silence stretched on, thick with the weight of the decision that hung in the air. Eve stood beside me, her presence calm, but distant, as if she knew that whatever choice I made, it had to be mine alone. I closed my eyes, feeling the energy of the nexus thrumming beneath my skin, and took a deep breath. Whatever came next, there would be no turning back. My hand hovered just inches from the nexus, trembling as its warm glow pulsed in time with my heartbeat. Eve's words echoed in my mind, pulling me in two opposing directions. The weight of the decision bore down on me like 1,000 tons, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly unsure of my next step. Destroy the system, and plunge everything into chaos? Reshape it, and risk becoming part of the very thing I had fought against? I could feel the energy radiating from the nexus. It wasn't malevolent, but it wasn't exactly welcoming either. It was just power. Raw, untapped, waiting for someone to make a choice, to wield it for whatever purpose they saw fit. The simplicity of that frightened me. My mind spun with all the faces I'd seen along the way, the strangers caught in their endless routines, unaware of the larger game at play. Had they chosen this life, as Eve said? Was their complacency part of a larger agreement they made, maybe without realizing it? Or were they prisoners, like I had believed myself to be? Either way, what gave me the right to decide for them? Eve, I said softly, my voice barely audible above the hum of the nexus. What happens if I reshape it? What does that even mean? She stepped closer, her presence somehow grounding, even though I still didn't know how to feel about her sudden shift in allegiance. If you reshape it, the system will adapt to your vision. It will still exist, but it will reflect the values and beliefs you choose to imprint on it. The people, the city, they will change, but not in the chaotic way destruction would cause. They'll be given the opportunity to live in a world that's different, a world of your making. I turned to face her, searching her eyes for the truth. But why would they need me to reshape it? Why not just let them choose for themselves? Isn't that what this whole journey has been about, freeing people from control? Eve's expression softened, but there was a sadness there, a weight she carried that I hadn't seen before. You misunderstand, Adam. The system doesn't prevent people from choosing. It reflects the collective will, the subconscious desires and fears of everyone it touches. It's a mirror. If you destroy it, you shatter that mirror and plunge the world into uncertainty. If you reshape it, you give them a new mirror, one that reflects something better, but it will still be a mirror. People will still see their fears and desires in it, only through a different lens. I stepped back, confused and frustrated. So, it's all pointless then? No matter what I do, people will still be trapped in the same cycle, just with a different facade? Eve shook her head slowly. Not pointless. You can't change human nature, Adam, but you can change the framework within which it operates. You can create a world where they have more opportunities, more chances to see beyond their own fears. It won't be perfect, but it can be better. Her words hit me hard, and I felt the weight of everything I had experienced, the struggles, the losses, the sacrifices, crash down on me all at once. Was that really all this was? Changing the system, only to have it reflect a slightly better version of the same flawed reality? It felt like a hollow victory, and yet wasn't that still better than letting everything fall apart? I turned away from Eve and stared at the nexus again, my thoughts swirling. I had wanted to be a hero, to believe that I could tear everything down and free people from the invisible chains that bound them. But maybe Eve was right. Maybe true freedom wasn't about destruction. Maybe it was about giving people the tools to free themselves, even if that meant keeping the system alive. But then another thought crept into my mind, something that I had tried to ignore for so long. What if I wasn't the hero? What if, all along, I had been part of the problem? I thought about the other me, the twisted, darker version of myself I had faced not long ago. He had accused me of running from my failures, of blaming the system for my own choices. Was that what I had been doing all this time? Projecting my own guilt onto something larger, something external, so I wouldn't have to face the truth about myself? I clenched my fists, feeling the familiar surge of anger and frustration rise within me. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. I had fought so hard, sacrificed so much. I deserved clarity, a clear answer. But instead, I was standing at the edge of an abyss, unsure of which way to leap. Eve's voice broke through the storm of my thoughts. Adam, whatever you choose, it will change everything. But it won't be the end. There will still be struggles, still be conflict. The world won't suddenly become perfect just because you made a decision here. But you can make it better. That's all we can ever do, try to make things better, even if it's just a little. Her words hung in the air, and I found myself staring at her, really seeing her for the first time since she had reappeared. There was a quiet strength in her, a calm acceptance of the complexity of the world that I had never possessed. She had seen more than I had, understood more, and yet, here she was, giving me the choice. I took a step closer to the Nexus, feeling its energies shift around me. It wasn't cold or unfeeling, but alive in a way that startled me. The system wasn't just a machine. It was a living, breathing entity, one that had grown from the collective consciousness of everyone it touched. And now, it waited for me to decide its future. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. The truth was, I didn't know what the right answer was. I didn't know if reshaping the system would truly lead to something better, or if destruction would offer the freedom I had been searching for. But I did know one thing: this journey had changed me. I wasn't the same person who had started this path, full of righteous anger and a desire to tear everything down. I had seen too much, learned too much. When I opened my eyes again, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I wasn't sure what I was going to choose, but I knew that whatever decision I made, it had to come from a place of understanding, not rage. I turned to Eve one last time. If I reshape it, will I still be me? Or will the system consume me, like it does with everyone else? Eve hesitated for a moment, her eyes searching mine. You'll still be you, Adam. But you'll be changed, just like the system will be. The two of you are connected now, whether you like it or not. That's the price of seeing the truth. Her words were both a comfort and a warning, and I felt the weight of the choice settle even more heavily on my shoulders. There was no easy answer, no clear path forward. But maybe that was the point. Life wasn't about easy answers. It was about making the best choices you could with the knowledge you had, and then living with the consequences. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the glowing surface of the Nexus. The energy surged through me, filling me with a warmth that was almost overwhelming. The choice was mine to make, and in this moment, I realized something important. I wasn't just deciding for myself. I was deciding for everyone. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for what came next. And then I made my choice. As soon as my hand made contact with the Nexus, a surge of energy shot through me, overwhelming every sense. My vision blurred, and I was no longer standing in the room. The ground seemed to vanish beneath my feet, and I was weightless, floating in an endless expanse of light and shadow. I couldn't tell if it was real or just in my mind, but it didn't matter. The feeling was all-encompassing. Images flashed before my eyes, moments from my life, moments I had tried to forget. I saw myself as a child, wide-eyed and innocent, full of hope for the future. Then I saw the darker times, failures, regrets, the mistakes that had led me down this path. Every moment of pain, every wrong decision, they all resurfaced, as though the Nexus was pulling them from the depths of my mind, forcing me to confront them all at once. I tried to pull away, but I couldn't. I was locked in, bound to this vision, and there was no escape. And then, amidst the chaos of memories, I saw Eve again, but this time not as the person standing next to me. I saw her as she had been when we first met, strong, defiant, unwilling to be bent by the system. It struck me that even then, I hadn't truly understood her. I had assumed that her fight was my fight, that her goals were my own. But now, as the Nexus peeled back layer after layer of my thoughts, I began to see it more clearly. Eve had always known more than she let on. Even from the beginning, she had understood the complexity of the system, the way it fed on both fear and desire. She had tried to show me, in her own way, but I hadn't been ready to see it then. I had been too consumed by my own rage. And now, here I was, faced with a choice that I had never truly been prepared for. The light around me shifted, swirling into a new shape, and I found myself standing in a city that looked both familiar and strange. It was Neo Haven, but not the one I had known. The buildings were taller, sleeker, and there was a sense of peace that had never existed before. People moved through the streets with purpose, their faces calm, unburdened by the constant tension that had once gripped the city. It was the world I had always dreamed of, a world free from the system's invisible chains. But something was wrong. As I moved through the streets, I noticed something unsettling. The people weren't really looking at each other. They walked with purpose, yes, but there was no connection between them, no spark of life. It was as if they were going through the motions, living in a dream they couldn't wake from. I watched a man step into a coffee shop, order a drink, and leave without ever once acknowledging the barista. A woman walked past me, her face serene, but her eyes empty. This wasn't freedom. This was a cage of a different kind. I turned, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, and then I heard it, an echoing voice, deep and resonant, calling out from the heart of the city. I followed the sound, weaving through the crowd, until I found myself standing before a towering structure made entirely of light. It pulsed with the same energy as the Nexus, its glow bright and hypnotic. The voice came again, this time clearer. "Welcome, madam. You have made your choice." I spun around, searching for the source, but there was no one there. The voice was everywhere, surrounding me, as though it came from the city itself. "You have chosen to reshape the system, to build a new world. But in doing so, you have become part of it." The words hit me like a physical blow. "No!" I shouted, backing away from the glowing tower. "This isn't what I wanted. I didn't want to control people. I wanted to free them." "And yet," the voice replied, calm and steady, "freedom, as you imagined it, is impossible. The moment you sought to reshape the system, you imposed your will upon it. You sought to create a better world, but in doing so, you have built a world in your image." I shook my head, refusing to believe it. "No, I didn't mean to. I just wanted to give people a chance, a real chance, to live without the system controlling them." The light around me flickered, and suddenly, I was back in the room with Eve. The Nexus still glowed between us, but now, I could see its true nature more clearly. It wasn't just a source of power, it was alive, an extension of every person it touched. It had grown, evolved, fed by the thoughts and desires of countless individuals over the years, shaping itself to fit their needs. And now, it was bound to me. Eve watched me silently, her face unreadable. "You understand now, don't you?" she said softly. "There's no escaping it. The system isn't something you can destroy or reshape without consequences. It reflects us, all of us. And the moment you tried to change it, you became part of it." I stared at her, my mind racing. "But there has to be a way out. There has to be a way to give people real freedom, without the system dictating their every move." Eve shook her head. "Freedom is an illusion, Adam. We all make choices, but those choices are shaped by the world we live in, by the systems we create. Even if you destroy this system, another will rise in its place. That's the nature of humanity. We build, we organize, we create structure because it's in our nature to do so." Her words left me hollow, a deep ache forming in my chest. Had I been fighting for nothing all this time? Had all my efforts, all the sacrifices I had made, led only to this, a new version of the same system, with me at its center? The voice of the Nexus echoed once more. "You have the power to guide them, Adam. To shape the world in a way that reflects your vision. But you cannot free them from themselves. They will always seek order, always seek structure. It is who they are." I looked down at my hands, feeling the weight of the decision I had made pressing down on me. This wasn't the victory I had imagined. It wasn't the freedom I had fought for. But it was the truth, and I couldn't run from it any longer. Eve stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. "The system will continue, with or without you. But you have the power to make it better. You can choose to step away, to let it evolve on its own." Or you can guide it, shape it into something that gives people more room to breathe, more room to grow. I closed my eyes, feeling the pull of the nexus deep within me. I could feel its power, its connection to everything and everyone. I could reshape it, bend it to my will, create a world where people had more freedom, more choice. But in doing so, I would always be a part of it, bound to the system I had tried so hard to escape. The silence stretched on, heavy and unyielding, as I wrestled with the weight of my choice. And then, slowly, I opened my eyes, ready to face what came next. The weight of my choice settled around me, a cloak woven from threads of uncertainty and responsibility. The nexus pulsed softly in the room, a constant reminder of the power I now held and the consequences that came with it. I turned to Eve, who regarded me with an intensity that made my heart race. I needed her clarity, her wisdom. "Eve," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "If I guide the system, what does that mean for the people? For Neo Haven? How can I ensure that this new order truly reflects their desires and not just my own?" She nodded, her expression shifting to one of contemplation. "It means you'll have to listen. Really listen. The Nexus connects you to the thoughts and emotions of those around you. It reflects their hopes, their fears, their dreams. But it also amplifies your own. If you're not careful, your personal biases can distort their voices." I took a step back, letting her words sink in. It was a double-edged sword, this power. To guide the system, I had to be both a leader and a servant, constantly aware of my own influences while striving to empower others. The enormity of that task made my head spin. "What if I fail?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop myself. "What if I lead them down a darker path? How can I know what's best for everyone?" Eve's eyes softened with empathy. "You can't know for certain. No one can. Every decision you make will have its repercussions, some unforeseen. The key is to foster an environment where others can contribute to the dialogue. It's not about having all the answers but about creating a platform for collective decision-making." The idea resonated with me, sparking a flicker of hope. I envisioned a world where the citizens of Neo Haven engaged with one another, their voices lifted in harmony rather than silence. But the thought of it was daunting. How could I transform a system designed to stifle individuality into one that celebrated it? "Start small," Eve advised, her voice steady. "Create forums for discussion. Gather people from all walks of life. Let them share their stories, their struggles, their desires. You can shape the Nexus to amplify their voices, making it a tool for connection rather than control." I felt a glimmer of excitement. It was possible. Maybe I could bridge the gap between the system and the people, empowering them to reclaim their lives and choices. But another thought loomed, heavy and unyielding. "And what about the ones who thrive within the old system?" I asked, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "Those who benefit from the status quo? What if they try to sabotage my efforts?" Eve's expression darkened slightly. "Change always comes with resistance. There will be those who fear losing their power, their control. They may fight back, attempting to undermine your vision. But that's why it's crucial to build a coalition of allies, people who believe in your mission and are willing to stand beside you." The fire ignited within me. I had fought too hard to turn back now, to let fear dictate my choices. I could rally others to my cause, to create a movement rooted in the belief that change was possible. But I also had to be strategic. I needed a plan. I glanced at the Nexus, its surface shimmering with potential. If I reshape it, how do I ensure it reflects their desires? Eve gestured toward the glowing core. You'll need to program it with the values you want to promote. Empathy, compassion, collaboration, those will be your guiding principles. But remember, it's a living system. It will evolve based on the interactions you facilitate. You have to be prepared for that fluidity. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words settle over me like a heavy mantle. I was no longer just Adam, the disillusioned rebel. I was now a custodian of this new world, a world that I would help create. Okay, I said, determination coursing through my veins. Let's start now. What do I need to do first? Eve smiled, a flicker of approval in her eyes. You need to connect with the nexus. Focus on the core values you wish to instill in the system, and let it flow through you. Your intent will shape its resonance, guiding the changes that come. With a nod, I approached the nexus once more, feeling its warmth envelop me. I closed my eyes, allowing the energy to seep into my consciousness. Images flooded my mind, people's faces, their stories, their dreams intertwined with my own. I envisioned a city where compassion reigned, where voices were heard, where everyone had a stake in their future. As I focused, I felt the nexus respond, the vibrations harmonizing with my intent. It wasn't just power, it was connection, a web of interwoven lives and experiences. The realization hit me. I wasn't alone in this endeavor. In that moment, I heard it, a chorus of voices, overlapping and blending together. They spoke of hope and fear, joy and sorrow. Their desires echoed in the recesses of my mind, calling out for recognition. I opened my eyes, determination flooding my veins. Let's give them a voice, I declared, feeling the energy of the nexus surge around me. The transformation was immediate. Colors burst to life around me as the nexus began to hum and vibrate, creating a resonance that filled the air. The walls of the room shimmered, blurring the line between the physical and the ethereal. The space around me expanded, morphing into a vast landscape filled with potential. Before me, a holographic representation of Neo Haven materialized, showcasing the city as it was, but also hinting at the possibilities that lay ahead. I could see the neighborhoods where people lived, their struggles, their triumphs, and the connections waiting to be forged. Look, I said, gesturing toward the city. We can start here. Let's highlight the communities, the issues they face, and the voices that need to be heard. Eve stepped beside me, her expression filled with awe. This is powerful, Adam. You're tapping into something profound. I felt a rush of exhilaration as the nexus responded to our focus. The city landscape pulsated with energy, and tiny nodes of light illuminated specific areas, places where dialogue was needed, where people were ready to come together. What do we do next? I asked, my heart racing. We need to create platforms for them to engage with each other, Eve replied. Discussion boards, community meetings, anything that fosters connection and understanding. Use the nexus to amplify their voices, so they know they're not alone. I nodded, excitement coursing through me. Let's do it. I want to bring people together, help them realize their potential, their power. I want to help them see that they have a choice. The vision of the city began to shift again, revealing empty spaces where connections were lacking, relationships that needed to be built. Each glowing point represented a potential dialogue, a chance for someone to step forward and share their story. I felt a surge of energy flow from the nexus into my core, filling me with determination. I had a plan, a way to empower the people of Neo Haven, to help them reclaim their lives from the system that had long dictated their paths. But even as I envisioned this new reality, a voice at the back of my mind whispered doubt. What if the people didn't respond? What if they were too entrenched in the old ways to see the possibilities before them? Yet I pushed the fear aside, focusing on the task ahead. If I was going to reshape this world, I had to believe in the potential for change. As the cityscape continued to morph around us, I turned to Eve, my heart racing with possibilities. Let's gather a team, people who share our vision. We can't do this alone. Eve nodded, her eyes sparkling with the thrill of what was to come. Yes. We need allies who understand the importance of connection and collaboration. We can reach out to community leaders, artists, thinkers, anyone who can help amplify the message. With renewed purpose, we set to work. I could feel the nexus guiding us, shaping the connections we needed to forge. Each time I touched its surface, it responded, bringing new ideas to life, crafting pathways that would lead us closer to our goal. As we delved deeper, the challenges began to emerge. Resistance, skepticism, and fear were all waiting just beneath the surface, like a dormant volcano ready to erupt. I knew that the people wouldn't simply accept this new vision. They would question it, challenge it, and perhaps even fear it. But that was part of the process. I had to be ready to engage with their doubts, to address their fears, and to foster a dialogue that would allow us to grow together. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the task ahead. This was not just about reshaping the system, it was about creating a community. A living, breathing entity that could grow, evolve, and thrive in a way that honored everyone's voice. And as I plunged deeper into the possibilities, I realized that this was my purpose. I was no longer just Adam, the rebel seeking to destroy the system. I was now Adam, the architect of a new reality, a reality built on connection, empathy, and the unwavering belief that together, we could create something extraordinary. But even as hope surged within me, the shadows of doubt lingered at the edges of my vision. I knew that the path ahead would not be easy. Resistance would rise, and challenges would test our resolve. But I couldn't turn back now. As I looked at Eve, the weight of what lay ahead settled in my chest. "Are we ready for this?" I asked, searching her eyes for reassurance. "The world may not be ready for what we're about to unleash." Eve's expression was resolute, a mix of determination and excitement that ignited my spirit. "Nothing worth doing comes without risk, Adam. Change requires courage. We can't control how others will react, but we can control how we respond. We need to trust in our vision and in the strength of the community we aim to build." With her words echoing in my mind, I felt the resolve solidify within me. I had already faced the darkness of the system, and now it was time to step into the light of possibility. "Let's do this," I declared, energy coursing through my veins. Together, we began to formulate our plan. We utilized the Nexus to identify key community leaders, artists, thinkers, and everyday citizens who had the potential to rally others. It became clear that the fabric of Neo Haven was vibrant, woven together by stories and experiences that had been stifled for far too long. Our first meeting was set in a small community center, a space filled with warmth and potential. As the day approached, I felt both exhilaration and nerves, wondering how the people of Neo Haven would respond to our invitation. Would they trust us? Would they be willing to engage in this new vision? On the day of the meeting, a diverse group of individuals filled the room, their faces a mosaic of curiosity and skepticism. I stood at the front, Eve by my side, ready to share our vision. The energy in the room buzzed with possibility, but I could also sense the underlying tension, questions waiting to be asked, doubts waiting to be voiced. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "We are here today because we believe in a different future for Neo Haven. A future where each of you has a voice, a real say in how our city evolves. We want to create a space where dialogue can flourish, where your stories can be shared and heard." A murmur of conversation rippled through the crowd. Some faces were intrigued, others remained cautious. I pressed on, determined to convey the urgency of our mission. "The system has controlled us for too long, dictating our lives and limiting our choices. But we have the power to reshape it, to transform it into something that truly reflects our collective desires." Eve stepped forward, her passion evident. "We want to hear your stories, your experiences, the challenges you face in your everyday lives. This isn't just about us leading, this is about all of us coming together to create a new narrative for Neo Haven." The conversation shifted as we opened the floor for discussion. One by one, people began to share their thoughts, their concerns, and their dreams. An elderly woman spoke about the isolation she felt in her community, while a young artist shared his struggles to find a space to showcase his work. Each voice added another layer to the tapestry we were weaving together. With every story shared, I felt the power of connection blossoming in the room. The doubts that had once clouded my mind began to dissipate as I realized how deeply the people yearned for engagement. They wanted to be heard, to be seen, and to be part of a greater purpose. As the evening progressed, I noticed a shift, a growing sense of camaraderie and enthusiasm. People began to exchange contact information, forming small groups to continue the conversations beyond our meeting. Hope replaced skepticism, and the possibility of change felt tangible. That night, as I lay in bed, I reflected on the evening's events. We had only scratched the surface, but the potential was electrifying. I was filled with a sense of purpose and a newfound belief in the people of Neo Haven. The following weeks were filled with discussions, brainstorming sessions, and workshops. The Nexus became a tool for empowerment, allowing us to visualize the collective input of the community. It was a living organism, expanding and adapting to the voices that flowed through it. Eve and I worked tirelessly, ensuring that every voice was valued, every story shared. Together, we organized events that brought people from all walks of life together: art exhibitions, forums, and cultural celebrations. We celebrated diversity, and in doing so, created a culture of empathy and understanding. Yet, as our movement gained momentum, so did the pushback. The guardians of the old system, those who thrived under its oppressive rules, began to see us as a threat. I received anonymous messages warning me to cease my efforts. I heard whispers of those who were unhappy with the changes we were promoting. Despite the threats, we pressed on. I had come too far to turn back now. I believed in the power of the community, and I would not allow fear to dictate our path. Eve remained steadfast, her belief in our mission unwavering. One evening, as we prepared for a major citywide event, I received word that a protest was brewing. Those loyal to the old system planned to disrupt our gathering. Tension hung in the air, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. Would our efforts be undermined? Would the community's progress be snuffed out? I gathered our core team, and we discussed how to respond. We could either confront the protesters head-on or find a way to defuse the situation before it escalated. In the spirit of unity, we decided to invite the protesters to join the dialogue instead of clashing with them. On the day of the event, as I stood on the stage addressing a crowd of hopeful citizens, I spotted a group on the periphery, faces twisted in anger, banners proclaiming loyalty to the old ways. My heart raced as I considered how to approach this delicate moment. Today, we are not just here to celebrate our progress, I announced, my voice echoing through the crowd. We are here to listen, to hear the concerns of those who feel threatened by change. We invite you to join us in this conversation, to be a part of this community, regardless of your beliefs. Gasps rippled through the audience, but I pressed on, feeling a surge of determination. Real change is not about division, it's about collaboration. We may not agree on everything, but we can still find common ground. A tense silence followed, and for a moment, I feared the worst. Then, unexpectedly, one of the protesters stepped forward, a man in his 50s, his expression a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. What do you expect us to do? Just accept that everything we've known is wrong? I nodded, acknowledging his question. No, I don't expect you to accept it. But I believe we can build a better future together. The old system had its strengths, but it also had its flaws. Let's talk about how we can improve it, how we can ensure that everyone's voice is heard. The crowd fell silent, eyes darting between the man and me. A moment stretched on, thick with anticipation, and then another voice chimed in from the crowd. We want to be heard too. We're scared of losing what little stability we have. I turned to the crowd, encouraged by their willingness to engage. That's exactly what we're here for. Your fears matter, and we need to address them together. Let's share our experiences, our worries, and our hopes. Together, we can create a future that respects the past while embracing the possibilities of tomorrow. Slowly, other voices joined in, first cautiously, then with growing confidence. The atmosphere shifted, and the tension that had once filled the air began to dissipate. The protesters stepped forward, drawn by the spirit of collaboration. In that moment, something extraordinary happened. A bridge formed between the opposing sides, built on the foundations of respect and understanding. What began as a confrontation transformed into a dialogue, an opportunity for healing. As we engaged in conversation, the barriers began to crumble. People shared their fears, their aspirations, and most importantly, their humanity. I witnessed the power of empathy in action, the realization that we were all navigating the complexities of existence, seeking connection and purpose. Over the next few months, our movement grew stronger. With each gathering, we fostered a culture of cooperation that allowed us to confront the challenges together. We hosted community projects that brought people from different backgrounds together, encouraging collaboration and building relationships. In time, we began to see tangible changes. The city started to transform, with initiatives aimed at improving neighborhoods, supporting local artists, and providing resources for those in need. The Nexus served as our guiding light, reflecting the collective aspirations of New Haven's citizens. As the seasons changed, the city blossomed in ways I had never imagined. Hope filled the streets, and the spirit of community flourished. I often found myself standing in the heart of the city, watching people connect, share, and grow. It was a sight that filled my heart with joy. And then, one day, as I stood before a group of children playing in a community garden we had built together, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. I thought of how far we had come, how we had navigated through uncertainty, fear, and resistance. With Eve at my side, I realized that the journey was never really about power or control. It had always been about connection, about giving people the opportunity to reclaim their lives, their voices, and their futures. As I looked out over the vibrant scene, I understood the essence of our work. The Nexus was not just a tool, it was a reflection of the community's spirit, a manifestation of our collective journey toward a brighter future. I turned to Eve, a smile breaking across my face. "We did it," I said, my voice filled with emotion. "We really did it." Eve smiled back, her eyes glimmering with pride and fulfillment. "This is just the beginning, Adam. We've created a foundation for change, but the journey will continue. The Nexus will evolve with the community, and we must remain vigilant in our commitment to listening and adapting." I nodded, understanding that our work was far from over. But the triumph we had achieved resonated deeply within me. The city of New Haven was not just a place on a map. It was a living entity shaped by the dreams and aspirations of its people. As I walked through the garden, children's laughter surrounding me, I felt a profound sense of purpose. The community had come together, overcoming fears and divisions to create a space where everyone had a voice. The past was no longer a chain binding us. It was a stepping stone towards a brighter future. A group of neighbors approached me, their faces glowing with excitement. "Adam, we've been discussing plans for the next community event," one of them said, a young woman with vibrant blue hair. "We want to celebrate the diversity of our city through music, food, and stories. It'll be a way for everyone to share their cultures and connect with each other." I felt a surge of warmth at their enthusiasm. "That sounds amazing! Let's make it a true celebration of our community. We can use the Nexus to help organize and promote it." As we brainstormed ideas and outlined our plans, I marveled at how far we had come from that first meeting filled with uncertainty. We had transformed fear into hope and division into collaboration. Each step we took reinforced the belief that together, we could create something beautiful. The days turned into weeks, and the preparations for the event began to take shape. Flyers were created, community meetings were held, and everyone had a role to play. The excitement was palpable, and I found myself filled with anticipation for what was to come. On the day of the event, the streets of New Haven came alive with vibrant colors and sounds. Booths filled with food from different cultures lined the streets, musicians played lively tunes, and families gathered to share their stories. It was a celebration of our diversity, a testament to the connections we had built. As I stood on the stage, looking out at the sea of faces, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. This was not just a festival, it was a symbol of everything we had achieved. I took a deep breath, prepared to address the crowd. "Thank you all for being here today," I began, my voice echoing through the lively atmosphere. "Today is a celebration of who we are, a celebration of our stories, our cultures, and our shared humanity. It is a reminder that together, we can create a community where everyone feels valued and heard." Applause erupted, and I could see smiles spreading across the crowd. It filled me with hope, and I continued. "This is not just a one-time event. This is the beginning of a movement, a commitment to continue building connections and fostering dialogue. Let us carry this spirit of unity forward, not just today, but every day." With every word, I felt the energy of the crowd rise. People began to cheer, their voices blending into a chorus of enthusiasm and hope. I watched as individuals from different backgrounds embraced, exchanging stories and laughter. The barriers that once divided us had crumbled, replaced by a collective desire for understanding and collaboration. As the event unfolded, I wandered through the crowd, soaking in the joyous atmosphere. I stopped at a booth where a group of children were painting a mural that depicted the city's diverse cultures. Their laughter echoed around me, and I realized that we had created something meaningful, something that would leave a lasting legacy for future generations. As night fell, the celebration continued. Colorful lights twinkled overhead, and music filled the air, creating an atmosphere of warmth and connection. I found Eve among the crowd, her face aglow with happiness. We embraced, both overwhelmed by the success of the day. "I never imagined it would turn out like this," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "You've done an incredible job, Adam. This is what it means to lead with heart. I couldn't have done it without you," I replied, the gratitude swelling within me. "Your guidance and belief in this vision made all the difference." As the festivities continued, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment, the struggles, the challenges, and the victories. I understood that the real power of the Nexus lay not just in its technology, but in the connections it fostered among people. And in that moment of realization, I knew that the future of Neo Haven was bright. We were no longer bound by the limitations of the past. We were creating a new narrative, one built on understanding, collaboration, and the belief that together, we could overcome any challenge. The music swelled around us, and as I looked out at the crowd, I felt a profound sense of hope. The journey was just beginning, but I was ready to embrace it. Together, we would continue to forge a path toward a future that honored every voice, every story, and every dream. In the heart of Neo Haven, we had found our way home,